Uh, Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee, Sri Lanka Medical Association, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to take part in this symposium. And during this presentation, I have used pictures of some patients and some families, and I have taken the prior consent of these families to use their pictures in the presentation. Now, uh, well, you may be a believer of the theory of evolution, complex chemical molecules in primordial sea, billions and billions years ago, getting together to form single cell organisms. And these single cell organisms uniting together to form multiple or complex cell organisms and eventually forming beings with multiple organs working in unison. And you may be a believer of the God's theory of creation. So whatever that you believe, the story of creation and story of life is fascinating and so powerful. I think as transplant surgeons, all of us have experienced and felt the power of giving life. And we, as transplant surgeons, when we do a transplantation, we save dying patients. And there's a message and feeling that you get is so powerful. And this lady, this girl who was dying about 5 years ago, came to us with acute liver failure. And she had just 12 hours to live because of her clinical condition. Luckily for her, we got the organ for transplantation. And today she lives a normal life. And that is the power of solid organ transplantation. Now, you have already heard about deceased donors. There are two ways of getting organs for transplantation. You have already heard about deceased donors. Another source of organs for transplantation is live donation. In Sri Lanka, there are two live donor solid organ transplants that we perform, the liver transplantation and kidney transplantation. Kidney transplantation started in Sri Lanka almost about 25 years ago. And today, it is very well established and we do large amount of kidney transplant in the country. But living donor liver transplantation started about 10 years ago and still it is in its infancy. Let's try to compare these two surgeries and try to understand the difference between these two surgeries, living donor liver transplantation and the living donor kidney transplantation. If you look at the kidney, we know that the kidney is a paired organ. We have one organ completely separated from another and located in a completely separate location. And single kidney, in one kidney has its own blood supply, its own venous drainage, and its own ureter. You can handle one kidney and remove even without touching the other kidney safely without entering into the peritoneal cavity. But the liver is a solid single organ, unlike kidney. And liver is one of the organs which is feared by surgeons because it's a chance of bleeding. But the good thing about liver is that even though it is a single organ, solitary organ, each segment has its own blood supply and venous drainage and bile duct drainage. And based on this principle, part of the liver, either one sector of the liver, one lobe of the liver, or even one segment of the liver can be harvested for transplantation. But the difficult thing about this surgery is that because all these structures are intimately related and packed inside a small area, you have to intimately handle the part that you're going to leave behind in the future. And slightest mistake in this process can end up in disasters and can damage the part that you're going to leave behind, and the surgery can end up in disasters. If you look at the profile list of these two surgeries, you should be able to understand that. And my rest of my talk is based on this. Of course, comparing blood loss, you are looking at about 400 milliliters of blood loss if you are doing a right lobe hepatectomy, right lobe donation. And the operating time is about 2 to 3 hours in kidney transplantation compared to 6 to 8 hours in liver transplantation. Recovery time is much, much longer with living donor liver transplantation. 20% of the patients will develop complications, and most importantly, 4 out of 1,000 if you do a right lobe donation, there's a risk to life in this surgery. If you look at the complication profiles of living donor liver transplantation, the kind of complications that you develop are complex. For example, bile duct injuries, bile duct complications, bile leaks are very complex. It might need ERCP, it might need external biliary drains, percutaneous transhepatic biliary dilatations, which needs experience in handling. portal vein thrombosis, ascites, liver failure, and various liver dysfunctions are very complex and needs a careful attention and experience in handling these complications. But most of all, donor death is a devastating complication of living donor liver transplantation. And this is one of the donors, a Sri Lankan donor who traveled to India. I think this was in news about 5 years ago. The donor died after the process of transplantation, and that was big news at that time. And similar incident that happened in Cincinnati, USA, this donor who died after transplantation has a devastating impact on the transplantation program itself. It almost closed down as a result of this donor death. So, living donor liver transplantation is a complex and demanding operation compared to kidney transplantation. It can lead to complex complications. Death of a donor can be a disastrous reality. So does that mean that we should not be doing living donor liver transplants for our patients? Now, how do we find the answer for that? If you look at this data, these are the number of patients who were transplanted in UK while they were waiting for diseased organs. And mind you, UK is one of the countries where they have one of the best disease donor programs. And while they were waiting for 6 months, only 60% were transplanted, and 10% died because they did not receive enough, they did not receive organs for transplantation. And that is the problem with disease donor transplantation. If you have diseased donors, then it's the best option. But the problem is it is never adequate to meet the demand of organs for transplantations, hence to save lives. And similar data, if you look at the global figures, on the left-hand side, you see North America. The black, this is number of transplants per 1 million population. On the left-hand side, you see North America. The black line is live donation and the pale line is disease donation. They do perform about 100 liver transplants per million population. And of that, about 20% are live donors. So that is in the presence of even a very well established disease donor programs, it is not adequate to meet the demand of organs for transplantation. The situation is completely different if you look at the right-hand side of the graph. Here, the South Asia and East Asia, the workhorse for organ transplantation, liver transplantation is live donation. There are two reasons for that. One, the cultural beliefs, especially in the East Asia, they have beliefs against disease donation. And the other most important thing is the infrastructure that we have in our part of this part of the world. Because for a successful disease donor program, you need a good infrastructure to coordinate things and to harvest all the potential organs. So that is the problem that we have in disease donation. So how do you rationalize live donation of livers? On one side, you have a dying patient. You know that unlike in kidney transplantation, for liver, when the organ fails, there is no way to bridge life. There is no dialysis. So it's a certain death. On one side, you have a dying patient. On the other side of the scale, you have a donor who's taking a risk on his life. But to balance the scale, should it be love towards saving your loved one? I think so. Saving your loved one, the love towards your family member, your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter, your father, love towards saving this patient's life. Can balance the scale. Of course, sometimes you find truly altruistic donors who will do anything to save someone else's life, especially like in Buddhist monks. But what about financial reward? Just because someone is poor, just because someone is financially not capable, should we allow them to take, especially in the case of living donor liver transplantation where there is a risk involved? Should we allow someone to take a risk on his life just because he's financially capable? He's not capable. So that's why it's very important to look at ethical aspects of organ transplantation, especially in the process of living donor liver transplantation. In Sri Lanka, ethical process is the donor and the recipient party submit their documents to institutional ethical review committee. There are institutional committees. If it is in private sector, the private hospital, the hospital has its own ethical review committee. If it is a government hospital, it has its own ethical committee. And they go through these documents and they approve that this pair, donor and the recipient, there is no financial transactions involved, and they recommend, and the recommended documents are approved by the Director General of Health Services. But this process mechanism has failed in our country because there are so many incidents, and Sri Lanka actually has been blacklisted, have earned black mark in the transplant community as a country where there is illegal transplants happening, especially with regard to kidney transplantation. And this is a very important concern, especially for living donor liver transplantation, because you're talking about a very, very complex operation that involves risks. Talking about ethics, there's another special aspect in liver transplantation. And this girl came with acute liver failure. She had a very small time for her transplantation to be done. And this process of ethical approval for live donor takes at least minimum 3 weeks. It goes in the normal route. But for emergency transplantation, there has to be a separate route of approval directly from the Directorate of Health Services. And this is still not established in our country. And this is another area that we need to look into. Let's look at finances of liver transplantation. India is one of the countries where they have very successful living donor liver transplantation programs. They do perform almost 2,000 to 3,000 liver transplants a year. There are big names involved in liver transplantation in India, and it involves large amount of money. And as a result, it has become a very attractive field for surgeons as well as trainees. So all the good it's a highly competitive field, and all the good trainees and good surgeons get involved in living donor liver transplantation. But in Sri Lanka, situation is completely different. There is no liver transplant involved in the private sector. It happens only in the state sector. There are no finances involved in liver transplantation. So there is no real financial benefit for living donor liver transplantation. There are three pathways actually you can take to perform living donor liver transplants. Either you can be a GI surgeon with HPB training, or general surgeon with HPV, or vascular and transplant surgeon who train in liver transplantation. But the problem is, for example, if you take a GI training, GI surgeon, even though they get a training, because there is no real reward involved with this, after some time they get stuck with endoscopies and they tend to forget spending time on liver transplantation. But sometimes you find surgeons who are really keen, who are really interested, who have passion for liver transplant. But the problem in our country is that there is no way to recognize the training that they have received in a certain specialty. So they do not get posted to places where their liver transplants are done. Especially this is a problem in the state or in the health ministry. And because of that, even the people who have got trained in liver transplantation, who love liver transplantation, they cannot get involved in living donor liver transplants. Just because I feel like doing a liver transplantation, I should not be allowed to perform liver transplantation, because you are performing a complex operation in a healthy individual. And the mistakes that you may make will end up in disasters. In other countries, in USA, UK, the surgeon needs to be accredited to say that he's competent to perform liver transplantation. And this should be established in our country. Otherwise, we can end up in disasters. Not only the surgeon, the center also needs to be accredited. For living donor liver transplantation, you need a lot of hardware in the theater to perform a safe surgery. Not only hardware, you need a big team involved with liver transplantation for living donors, especially to manage complications. You need facilities to perform ERCP, you need hepatologist backup, you need interventional radiologists, good radiologists who can interpret your CTs. Without all these facilities, the center should not be allowed to perform a living donor liver transplantation. Another specific problem that we see in our country is fatty liver. When we looked at our donors at the beginning of our program, we saw that most of our donors had fatty liver. In our donor assessment protocol, first we do ultrasound scan, basic blood investigations, and then you do advanced blood investigations, and finally referrals and advanced imaging. First stage is ultrasound scan. Half of our patients were rejected because of the initial assessment of ultrasound scan. They had fatty liver, and this has been a major problem in finding suitable donors for liver transplantation in our country. Now, other important area is the cost. Liver transplantation is expensive surgery. Now, this is a family that we transplanted recently. They are from far away place. To travel to Colombo, they have to spend quite a lot of money. And during the process of transplantation, they had to stay around Colombo, Ragana, and they need to buy drugs, certain investigations, perform certain investigations that are not available in the hospital. So that's a major undertaking for a family like this. But does that mean just because you are financially poor, does that mean that you should not be given a chance to live? I don't think so. I think it should be a combined effort. In my view, should be a combined effort. 50% of the commitment should come from the ministry or the state. And the remaining commitment should come either from the family and from the supporting groups. And we have practically seen that this is possible. For our transplants, there are support groups that have come up, especially overseas expats, Sri Lankan expats. They have got together and they support families after transplantation. And I think it should be a collective effort where the family, state, and the people who are willing to support help these patients to undergo liver transplantation, at least during this economic crisis. So, living donor liver transplantation is life-saving. All these are donors and recipients. All these patients would have died if not for living donor liver transplantation. So, for future and for the present, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is a major challenge, and that has been a major problem in finding suitable for donors for liver transplantation. And I believe the ethical process needs to be streamlined to prevent unethical practices, especially in the case of living donor liver transplant. Training of surgeons need to be accredited. Not only the training centers to perform liver transplantation, living donor liver transplantation should also be accredited. And I also believe that there should be a mechanism to reach the finances of the high cost involved with the liver transplantation. I'm sure, I don't know whether you have seen this picture, ladies and gentlemen. This is a picture taken just before the main Perahara at Mahasaman Devalaya at Ratnapur. And this is one of the figures that you see in the Perahara, the Mahabamba. If you look from the front, this is the front view and the back view. Left-hand side, you see the front view, right-hand side, you see the back view. It has two faces. From the front, you see the serene face. But if you look from the back, it is a feared face that you see. And living donor liver transplantation is something like that. It can save lives if you use it properly, but it has two faces. Thank you very much.